This tutorial is aimed at helping the beginner student understand what does the left hand do. Its primary job, of course, is to fret notes. Also has the job of muting strings so that it stops some notes from ringing. Let's have a little bit closer look at both of those techniques. The primary job of your left hand is, of course, to fret notes. To start understanding the mechanics of how to fret notes, you want to take the tip of your finger and make sure that it is almost perpendicular straight down into the string and the fretboard. You want to counteract that pressure by making sure that your thumb is back here on the back of the neck, so that you've got your thumb back here pushing this way and your fingers pushing this way. You want to make sure that from the very tip of your finger to the first knuckle, it's almost straight down in, right there, just like that. So, once you get the basics of that down, the thumb pushing here lightly, and your finger pushing here lightly, then you're ready to give it a try. Play the note, any fret, by putting your finger on the string directly behind the fret. Not on top of the fret, because then you'll get a muted, buzzy sound. Not too far back, because then it makes it too hard to play. It gets a buzzy sound. But you want to get right up against the fret for the most efficient placement and leverage. Now, you want to make sure you're pushing hard enough, but not too hard. If you push too hard, it doesn't really affect anything. I'm pushing harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. Whew! Hurts my finger. All you need is enough pressure to make the note sound. If you don't push hard enough, you'll hear, because it'll sound buzzy or muted. So, you want to make sure that you get just enough pressure. Not too much, not too little, but just enough. Another problem with pushing too hard is that when you need to get from one note to the next, or from one chord to the next, it'll be too hard. Your hands will be cramped and you'll be trying to fight it to move. So, just enough pressure is all you want. It takes practice, but you'll get there. Now, the other thing is that you can use the pads of your fingers to cover, for example, more than one string. You can also use your entire finger. You'll find out later that you can do bar chords like that. But regardless of whether or not you're using the tips of your fingers, or the pad of your finger, or your entire finger, you want to make sure that you use just enough pressure. You want to make sure that you're right behind the fret. You want to make sure that you've got your thumb pushing from the other end so that you get a clamp of power in between, like that. And you want to make sure that you don't push too hard, otherwise it's wasted effort. Once you get the basics of how to fret a note, you'll notice that your left hand also can initiate sound on its own. For example, I can hold this note and then pluck it once, but then, without plucking it again, hammer on. And then I can pluck a note and pull off. Let's look at that a little bit closer. The hammer on literally is your finger hammering on, slamming down with enough force so that the string rings at this fret where you hammered on. The pull off is the reverse. You literally want to start with both fingers, or one finger if you're pulling off to an open string, and then pull a little bit and then let go. Now that's exaggerated because you can hear I'm changing the pitch. Usually it's just enough to get the string in motion. When you combine a hammer on with a pull off, what you get is what's known as a trill. So the left hand can initiate sound on its own without needing to pick. Also, just like the right hand, the left hand has a secondary job, and that is to mute. Muting in this case means to use the inside of your finger, or sometimes the tip of your finger, any part of your finger that's necessary to stop the strings from ringing instead of holding down the frets so that they do ring. Kind of an opposite effect there. What happens a lot of times is when you hold down, for example, a big bar chord, you might want just these strings to ring and these not to ring up here. So what you might do is you might hold on to the bottom strings by pushing them hard enough, but then lean these fingers on the strings. Don't push so hard that they all ring, but push hard enough that it doesn't ring so that you only hear the ones you want ringing. This is also greatly used as a percussive effect. For example, you can lightly hold your fingers across all the strings and get what's called a ghost note, a rhythmic strum. You can do that with individual notes too. For example, you can hold on to just one note and then mute by curving my finger slightly around. I can barely graze these two strings here, the B and the E, and I can also reach over with my thumb or with my other fingers so that I miss everything about the G string, but every other note on every other string is slightly muted out so that I can get all this until I push down on that A note and get so muting is a very, very subtle thing that can be very useful for both hands. In this case, what we're talking about though is how the left hand is supposed to be able to mute all of the strings, some of the strings, or just one of the strings. So there you have it. The primary job of the left hand is to fret notes and also to mute so that it stops some other notes from happening that you don't want to happen. Again, like the right hand, some of this does seem a little bit complicated, but with enough practice, it can become second nature, and it can be something that forms the basis of any guitarist technique. So practice it, have a lot of fun.